I think that patch 1.6 has given the largest makeover to the game yet in terms of stat rolls on gear. I know that patch 1.4 also had a bit of an impact, you know, making skill power and crit damage rolls a lot less powerful, but it also created a meta where everybody was still required to pretty much always spec into the same thing, armor. This was kinda annoying as it limited build diversity and it made the RNG a lot more harsh. So what did the developers do? Well, they removed armor as a possible role on gear and gave players health instead. They've also created a new statistic called All Resilience and shuffled a whole lot of stats around to give players more of a choice. Did they succeed in giving players more build diversity? Well, a little bit. I already mentioned this in my patch 1.6 is broken video that I made in week 2 of the PTS, but because the developers changed the scaling of stamina from 30 health per point to 15 health per point, speccing into stamina as a main stat isn't really that effective anymore, which makes the plus health rolls on gear a lot more powerful right away. I mean, that makes sense, right? Health is a lot harder to stack because stamina doesn't give you as much anymore, and thus any free health that you can get from any place on your gear, that is going to be much more important to have now. So yeah, long story short, health is the new armor. Having health on your gear is just as important, but it is important for different reasons. And in this video, I will give you plenty of examples as to why, with all the numbers behind it. But for those that just want to get a quick overview of what to spec in for patch 1.6, here are the 6 gear item categories with the best in slot rolled item as an example. I've also included a picture of each of these for you to download in the description down below, so you can snag those without having to come back to the video to double check every single time that you find an item. So yeah, go download those pictures or something. Anyway, for those that actually want to watch the whole video, let's begin with the breakdown. When it comes down to main stats, I think there are only 2 ways that you can really go in patch 1.6. You can either spec for a lot of firearms, or you can go with a lot of electronics. As a solo player, you're probably going to want a nice balance between these two for the best and easiest experience, but generally speaking, getting a lot of stamina is not going to be very effective. This is because of 2 things. First up, as I said, the developers reduced the amount of health that you get per stamina point to 15, all the way down from 30. Which means that stacking a lot of stamina will result in a lot less extra HP than it did in 1.5. Not only that, but the average amount of damage mitigation that players have from armor that will float around 30 to 35%, which means that your total toughness will not be inflated as much because of armor. Having a bit of stamina, of course, cannot hurt, right? You want to make yourself at least a little bit durable, right? Or maybe you just need that stamina to unlock some of the talents. In that case, also, it can't hurt to spec a little bit into it, but honestly, anything over 5,000 stamina is just a straight up waste. But Marco, you ask, if we aren't speccing into stamina, then how do you expect us to trade fire for more than a second without going down? And that's a very good question with a very, very simple answer. You're gonna need to get health rolls on your gear. Not only are these health rolls a decent alternative to buff your survivability, which gives us more freedom to spec into either skill power or firearms on the main stat, but it also happens to be that these health rolls on your gear are rolled at ridiculously high amounts compared to anything else in the game. Let's for example take a look at the knee pads. The major rolls there are health, critical hit damage, all resistance, exotic damage resilience, skill power, and enemy armor damage. Now there are a couple of things that I consider to be useless here, so I want to start off by removing those stats first. Beginning with the new stat, all resistance. This is a useless stat because it is rolled in such absurdly low amounts. What this stat does is it gives you resistance versus all types of CC. So having 3% all resistance will result in having 3% fire resistance, 3% disorient resistance, 3% shock resistance, and all that stuff. It sounds okay, but the reality is that 3% is a laughably low amount, considering that I can get 33% fire, shock, and disrupt resistance on a knee pads alone. If you get all the all resistance rolls in the game possible, including the rolls on the mods, you would end up with essentially 21% all resistance, reducing the duration of an on fire or a shock effect by only 21%. Therefore, I don't really think it's ever worth to spec into all resistance. Enemy armor damage is also pretty much useless in PvP in patch 1.6, not only because the average armor percentage that players run around with has, as I said, been dropped down to 30 to 35%, but the amount of enemy armor damage that you get per roll have also been lowered, meaning that if you apply the PvP formula for enemy armor damage to someone in patch 1.6, you will see that the difference that you do in damage will not be more than a few hundred damage per bullet. And that is at optimal conditions with 30% enemy armor damage on your character. That is a whole lot in patch 1.6. Enemy armor damage might as well be removed from PvP in its current state, because the effect right now, it's not even noticeable. Skill power is also pretty easy to write off, even for the skill power focused builds. Skill power on the knee pads only rolls between 11,347 and 13,339. Now, of course, the difference here, it's a very small difference, and if it would just be that, then I would say you can just go for skill power without caring too much. But the thing is that a point of electronics still gives you 30 skill power, as opposed to stamina, which, as I said, only gives you 15 health. So if we divide the health amount by 15 and divide the skill power amount by 30, you will see that the health rolls actually give the player a lot more worth of main stats than the skill power rolls, which means that even for the skill power orientated players, it is better to spec more into electronics and then take the health rolls on the knee pads instead. Because doing it the other way around, it will leave you with both less toughness and less skill power. This is why we do these best in slot guides. You can spec into one thing, but if you don't spec in it the right way, you're still gonna end up with a shittier build than someone else. The crit damage rolls on the knee pads are also very, very low. Maybe unless I'm going for a glass cannon Deadeye build, I might want to pick this up, but for every other situation, I simply cannot justify ever taking crit damage. On the weapon mods, you can get 20% on the scope, 20% on the barrel, 20% on the muzzle. You can get 15% with deadly, you can get another 30% with a somewhat decent pulse, and on the gloves you can get another 16%. But even if those rolls weren't available to the player, 9% is still terribly low. To put it in perspective for you, if we would have a player with around 7,000 firearms, 60% critical hit chance, and 0% critical hit damage, at which point you would say that adding more firearms, it wouldn't be that effective, and adding more critical hit damage, that would of course increase your overall damage tremendously. But even then, adding 1112 firearms to that build would still result in more damage than adding 9% crit damage. That is how bad the 9% crit damage roll here actually is. There's barely any possible situation where picking up the crit damage over the health roll would actually result in a character that is overall a lot stronger. And for that reason, I'm going to write this off the list as well, if you don't mind. Now, exotic damage resilience, that is the only stat that I could say, yeah, I see reason to take this, especially with all the grenades, the fire turrets, and the seeker mines that people can throw your way. Not to mention the historian, which is an actual thing now. I don't think exotic damage resilience is a bad pickup per se. Thing is though, exotic damage resilience doesn't really help you a whole lot in PvE, as the NPC grenades, they're usually pretty easy to dodge because of the early red indicators. And the health is less situational in PvP as well, because it makes you more tanky versus grenades, but also more tanky versus actual gun damage. And on top of that, it also makes your medkits heal for more, because those are percentage based dependent on the amount of health that you have. So, unless you for some reason want to stack a whole lot of exotic damage resilience, which I'm not saying is bad, it's a possible thing to do, I think that the only viable option on the knee pads is health. So now that everybody understands the value that health provides to the player, it's time to look at the first item category on the list, and that is the chest piece. The chest has the luxury of being able to roll two major stats. We have enemy armor damage, all resistance, health, HP on kill, exotic damage resilience, and skill haste. Now, the first thing we're obviously going to take is health. We just discussed that for a couple minutes. But the second one, well, that's going to be a tough decision. Enemy armor damage and all resilience, they can be thrown right out of the window because for obvious reasons. But HP on kill, skill haste, and even exotic damage resilience, they are all valid choices. HP on kill is very strong in patch 1.6 because ever since patch 1.4, NPCs die a lot sooner, allowing you to practice a lot more often. And in patch 1.6, running without skill power is going to severely hammer on your sustain. So sources of healing that do not require the player to spec into skill power, they're going to be very, very powerful. HP on kill is also percentage based of your own health, and since we're taking health rolls whenever we can, this kinda synergizes well with that. But skill haste is also a strong addition because it allows you to use your skills, including your heals, a lot more often, which also adds sustain without relying on getting finishing moves. I mentioned at the start of the video when we were looking at the main stats that there are two ways you can go. You can either make a firearms build or you can make an electronics build. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to split this up into two possible build options. If you play with a high firearms, you are more likely going to get the finishing blows, and your skills are also going to be pretty shitty. Therefore, held on kill would suit that kind of a build better, because you're going to proc it a lot more often. If you're going for an electronics focused build, then skill haste is probably going to be the thing that you want to go for. Because with a low amount of firearms, you're not going to proc that held on kill that often. And if you of course rely on your skills to get shit done, having your skills more often is a very powerful thing. However, with that being said, I still believe that exotic damage resilience is definitely going to be the go-to option for the firearms oriented players if you play a lot of PvP. On the knee pads, I admittedly didn't want to pick this up because giving up health simply isn't worth it, but in a situation where you can pick up health and then something else as well, having that extra Seeker Mine, Grenade, or Historian Protection helps you a lot more than a 4 or 5% health on kill will do. But of course, that's also a matter on whether you play more PvE or more PvP. So you're gonna have to decide this one for yourself. For the minor attributes, the ammo is an obvious choice. You can go for increased kill experience if you're creating some sort of sealed cache farming build. But that's not what we're doing today. We're creating the most effective build possible in terms of player power, not in terms of how fast can I rack in those caches. The mask offers a bit of variation simply because of the fact that this item doesn't have a health roll on it. So because this is not something that we can choose, we have other things to pick up. We have critical hit chance, enemy armor damage, HP on kill, exotic damage resilience, all resistance, and skill power. And with these options, this kind of puts us in the same position as with the second roll on the chest piece, where players can choose based on what they spec their main stats into. If your build is focused on a lot of crit and you have a high amount of firearms, then critical hit chance is probably the way to go. But if your build is based on electronics, and again you have your skills to get your shit done, then of course you want to spec into skill power. For the miner, you absolutely want to get the burn resistance here. In 1.6, the resistances actually reduce the damage that you take and the duration from those status effects that they protect you against. And since an on fire effect is one of the most annoying status effects in the game, I think that stacking this as high as possible is your best move if you play a lot of PvP and you meet a lot of fire turret users. However, if you play a lot of PvE, then I can also recommend picking up the damage to elites here. 10% extra damage is not something minor at all, and it will help you burn through that content a lot quicker. The knee pads, we kinda already covered them earlier, plus health is the way to go here, and then for the miners, you want to get burn resistance, shock resistance, and disrupt resistance, because these three status effects are the ones that have the biggest impact on a fight. If you're playing PvE for the most part, then again, I can also really recommend switching one of these out for a fat damage to elite boost up to 15% here. That's a lot, that really is. So yeah, go pick those up. The backpack is also pretty straightforward. It rolls crit damage, health, skill power, or weapon stability as the major. And although weapon stability can definitely be a good thing to pick up, especially on consoles, there are so many other places in the game where stability can be acquired. Weapon mods, talents, or even the smart cover, even the striker gear set, which is top tier this set, and they all come with much smaller trade-offs than having to give up health. So again, we're gonna pick up the health here as a major, and then as a minor, you probably guessed ammo capacity, but you could also go for an additional bit of burn resistance as well. This together with the mask and the knee pads, where we also spec into burn resistance, will give us around 66%, which means that any on-fire effect applied to us will only last for a third of the duration and only do a third of the damage. Yeah, that's pretty good. So now you probably also understand why I rated Firecrest so low in my gear set tier list video. Resistances, man, they're good. If only all resistance wasn't rolled in such low amounts. Gloves are pretty interesting, as not only do they not have a health roll on them, but they actually also have a lot of cool options to take. We have all weapon damage types, health on kill, skill haste, critical hit chance, critical hit damage, and enemy armor damage. I'd say that the extra base damage for the weapon types are pretty much a must-have, as the extra damage is added to the base of the weapon before any calculations take place, meaning that the damage boost that players get, such as competent or booster shot, also increase the weapon damage stats by 10 or 15%, making them a must-pick. But other than that, there is choice! Yes, we have choice! If your build focuses on a lot of firearms, then a critical hit chance and a critical hit damage is what you want to go with, even if you're not speccing into crit all that much. The crit chance and the crit damage rolls on the gloves are so high in comparison to what they roll on the backpack or the knee pads or on the mask, that they're really hard to pass out on. They give the player a lot of value regardless of the build that you're going with. But if you have a skill power orientated build, you are probably going to want to pick up skill haste and held on kill. Or instead of the held on kill, because you're not getting those finishing blows, you could also go with the second weapon damage increase. For example, if you're playing with the Liberator and the Centurion, you want to get assault rifle damage, but then also pistol damage. And then we have the holster, which is probably the only place where health isn't a must pick up simply because the amount is relatively small and the 4% crit chance that you can get instead, that's relatively high. It can only roll up to 7,000, which isn't all that much, and for that reason I'd actually recommend damage players running with critical hit chance here, and skill power players getting the skill haste. The gear mods, they don't roll with anything that we haven't already talked about, and one of those rolls is health, which actually rolls in quite a high amount when compared to the rest of the statistics. For example, we have a 1% crit chance here, and we have 3,335 health. If we compare that to the holster, which had 4% crit chance and 7,000 health, you will see that the crit chance to health amount is way more in favor of the health roll on these mods, which makes it once again a no-brainer to take health as well. However, for the skill power orientated players, skill haste is also a possibility here, as 3% skill haste on a mod, that's also a very high amount. So if you really need that extra skill haste, then I wouldn't bash your skull in for picking it up here as well. But yeah, put all those things together and you will end up with something that looks like this for the ones that spec'd into firearms, and something that looks like this for the ones that spec'd into electronics. To repeat myself from what I said at the start of the video, health is the new armor, and although you can deviate from this path a little bit here and there, going with anything else than I presented in the video will leave your character at a pretty significant disadvantage, not only for PvE, but also and especially in PvP. If you have any questions left, then of course you can let me know in the comments down below, or you can simply hit me up on Twitter. Again, a link to all the pictures has been included in the video description, but yeah, that's going to wrap it up for today. As always, I will see you guys later, or like they say, in the Netherlands... Wait, you still don't have strikers?